LPT. If a loved one is taken in an ambulance, do not follow us to the hospital. Go there on your own time and own route. As a medic, whenever I was loading a patient in the ambulance, a family member would inevitably run up to me, keys in hand, saying, "I'll follow you to the ER." No. People in an emotional state following another vehicle will develop tunnel vision and forget all traffic laws. You will blow stop signs. You will follow me right through an intersection, even if the light has already turned red for you. And you will slam into the back of the ambulance if we need to make a sudden stop. Remember, patient faces backwards and can see out the back window as you blow a red light and get T-boned by an overloaded ice cream truck. After we leave, wait 10 minutes. Take a deep breath and slowly make your way to the hospital. User 1. Exactly what happened to me and my dad. Mom had an ambulance pick her up. Dad followed the ambulance. Pops blew all the red lights while I was yelling at him to slow down and stop for the lights. Got to the hospital. The EMT stormed out of the ambulance and scolded my dad for his driving. User 2. I've been that EMT. I specifically told someone, I'll be breaking a few traffic rules, but I'm in a big green box with bright blue lights on the roof. You are in a tiny car. Please don't chase me. Nothing is likely to change before you get there. We are going quickly, but only through an excess of caution and a wish to minimize pain. And sure enough, he chased me, exceeding the speed limit, jumping red lights, the works. Unfortunately, it's made very clear when you do your emergency driver training that if something goes wrong near you, you'll have to defend yourself too, even if normally not at fault. I'm a volunteer. I'm not losing my license over this blow. So I slowed down, practically back to normal conditions drive. We thankfully made it to hospital without an RDC evolving behind us. He jumped out, and first thing he did was try to scold me. Why were you driving so slow? Because I could see you matching me, and I have to keep everyone safe. I told you not to chase me. You ignored me. Of course, he's not going to accept any responsibility and just brushed past me, ahead of us into the department. We hand over as normal, and his family member goes into the waiting room. Sure enough, he's back over to me when I'm checking in, asking how he makes things move fast. I pointed him towards the receptionist, who I'm told did her NHS receptionist brethren proud. I was not brave enough to stay in the department long enough to see for myself. User 3. I still remember the first day of my EMS class. I remember them telling us that out of all the people involved on your call, your patient is your fourth priority. First is to yourself. Second is to your partner/crew. Third is to anyone else in the situation that isn't a patient. Because anyone in those first three groups can immediately become another patient. Only after reasonably caring for those first three groups do you move on to group 4, the actual patient. User 4. Amen. I followed the ambulance with my child in it from the hospital to an inpatient facility during a huge snowstorm. I could have/should have used my GPS and taken my time getting there more safe. Nothing awful happened. But long after the fact, when I had returned to that facility numerous times, I realized focusing only on my driving and safe arrival would have been much less stressful for me, and equally as effective as following an ambulance in a snowstorm through some higher traffic areas. It's difficult to think logically enough to slow down and focus on the task at hand when emotions run high. But IRL, it's never been a mistake to do that. User 5. When my nan had a stroke, the paramedics literally said to us, "She's stable now. They'll do their stuff at the hospital. Give it a good 2 hours before showing up so they can work." User 6. To piggyback off of this tip, if your loved one needs to stay in the hospital for some time, it's better to visit as much as you can. But I wouldn't suggest taking time off from work while they are in the hospital and stable. At the hospital, your loved one essentially has round-the-clock care and resources. When you should take off work to help, possible of course, is once the patient is discharged home. This is when people usually need help at first with the transition and less resources for daily things. User 7. Also, how can you actually follow an ambulance? They put sirens and lights on, go through red lights, clear a path through traffic and speed. Do people really think they're gonna somehow safely keep up with that? With no marker for other cars to know, they're not just being a dick driver taking advantage by trying to overtake after an ambulance? And then you get to the hospital and you just gonna abandon your car in the ambulance bay? Like, I get shock and stress make people do dumb things, but I've never ever heard of anyone trying to follow an ambulance, LOL. User 8. The day my son was born, it was discovered he had a heart defect and had to take an ambulance ride from our original birthing hospital to a pediatric hospital that had a cardiac NICU. Anyways, the lead medic told me to not panic while following if all of a sudden they had to turn on the lights or speed up their transport, because it didn't necessarily mean that my son was having a medical issue on board, but more likely another critical call came in for someone else and they would have to hustle. I'm super thankful for that medic giving me that heads up and bit of logical insight during an otherwise very stressful time. User 9. Is it okay to grab some snacks on the way? I did that once and felt terrible, but I was hungry. User 10. Besides, the ambulance takes the patient to the back. You walk through the front. Following doesn't accomplish anything. User 11. One day while driving home from the store, an ambulance came up behind me, so I pulled over to give way. There was no one behind me prior to the ambulance, and I checked my mirror, saw no one right behind me, so I pulled back onto the road. A few seconds later, I got cut off by a speeding SUV. They illegally passed me, almost hit oncoming traffic head on, causing me to slam on my brakes. The car then tailgated the ambulance, presumably until they reached the hospital. I've had to call an ambulance for my parents a few times, and the paramedics told me me the same thing. Take your time getting to the hospital. We've collected enough medical history. Patient is stable. It'll take a moment for your loved one to get settled once at the hospital, meaning checked in, evaluated, and moved to an ER bed. So I calmly got myself ready, packed some things for my parent, and then drove over. Your loved one will appreciate being greeted by someone familiar who's cool, calm, and collected versus someone who stressed themselves out getting to the hospital and is frantic. If you're feeling stressed and frantic, just imagine what the patient is feeling. Be their support person. User 12. My cousin followed the ambulance her son was in after he'd been badly injured at the house. She said she saw when they turned off the siren and stopped speeding. She wishes she had not witnessed that moment. She's not a reliable narrator at the best of times, but if this is what happened, it's heartbreak. User 13. Honestly, I don't know where you are, but here, Eastern Europe, traffic basically crawls to a stop and parts to the sides whenever an ambulance is coming. Can't really imagine someone right behind the ambulance getting T-boned. That would require for said ice cream truck to somehow be coming at the ambulance at high speed, but planning to just miss it, which is a very weird scenario.